The public needs to worry about defense, full stop. There is not one bit of regulation in the world about AI in defense. Artificial intelligence is not totally robust. You change a little bit of the input and the machine changes its behavior radically. So sometimes it's unpredictable. And when it's not predictable, it means you don't control it very much. Whenever I read claims about AI becoming intelligent, self-aware, conscious, creative, overtaking humanity, that's low-quality sci-fi. And sometimes it feels that by saying that AI is going to become self-aware, conscious, superintelligence, they try to derail the public debate on the governance of AI. Why do you have to be the first? You don't have to be the first. You have to be able to produce solid technology that people in your country can buy and use reliably. I'm more interested about how liberal democracies can defend their power without betraying their values in a world where AI race, digital race become the prevalent narratives. There are many things we still have to learn about these technologies, and I think the most important thing that we have to learn.
Welcome to Disruptor Confessions. I'm John Ayers. You know, we talk about AI like it's a gadget, it's a trend, it's a headline, but behind the scenes, quietly, relentlessly, AI just feels like it's reshaping power. Our guest today is Professor Mariarosaria Taddeo. She is one of those rare people who studies this from the inside. She holds a PhD in philosophy and has become one of Oxford's leading voices in digital ethics, defense, technology. Her work informs governments, militaries, and industries that most of us will never be in the same room with. She's here to help us understand the world we're stepping into, or perhaps the world we're already living in and we don't even know it. Dr. Taddeo, thank you for joining. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for having me.
A few weeks ago when we talked, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the pace of change and the AI that's happening and how we just kind of live in the ChatGPT world. But you were mentioning you were at a coffee shop, I think, and you overheard two women talking. And I wanted to just start there because I think it speaks to where we are today. Do you mind just reflecting on that observation?
Yeah, I think I was mentioning that I was just in a coffee shop and the two young women behind me, they were just talking about AI and something like the ChatGPT or some LLMs helping them in doing some type of essays or homework for the university. And the reflection was that 5 years ago, this would have not happened. I've been working in the AI area, ethics of technology area for about 20 years now. And for many, many decades, AI was a niche topic, something that people studying it would know about and talk about, but not every people. And, AI has gone through they're called summers and winters, so waves. There was a big spike, it's called the first summer of AI between late 50s and 60s, where research started on AI, but at the time we didn't have the right amount of data and the necessary computational power to develop AI. So the research went down, and that's called the winter of AI. And then AI surged back around 2012 with a paper describing AI for image recognition, Alexander Knecht, and that sparked the second summer of AI. This is where we started thinking about neural networks and that sort of things. But even in 2012 or after 2012, AI was still a niche topic. You wouldn't hear people in coffee shop talking about AI. And it's not just Oxford. I travel a lot, so it's Milan, it's Paris. AI is now in every pocket, in every mind, in every chat we might occasionally take during a day. It's been with the foundational models and the LLMs and the Claude, the ChatGPT of the world that AI has become a pervasive technology. It's a point of reflection for me because it's been quite steep.
This is super interesting because I hadn't heard the summer-winter story arc, if you will. So thank you for that. And you mentioned 2012 about image recognition. I was thinking you were going to say that like attention is all you need, which I think was the paper in 2018 or so. But I think you call attention to this notion of the general public just seems to know more about it. Businesses are talking about it. I think I just heard recently ChatGPT has 800 million, probably close to 1 billion users. If the public isn't using ChatGPT, they may be using Gemini or Anthropic's Claude or something else. You've been doing this a long time. You just talked about some of that. And it was probably in a small circle of people who were really deep into the AI space. I think the topics we're going to get into, Rosaria, are going to be deep and they're going to be heavy topics. And we have a general population that I want to make sure this resonates. And I can't help but think about the world you live in and the research around this topic of AI, and you have gone deep into AI and defense. But do you recall in your studies over the last 20 plus years, when you kind of had an aha moment in this space where you thought, this isn't just a trend, this is going to change society and how we live?
It was way before AI. Is more the aha moment for me was about what we these days call the digital revolution. At the time, we will call it the information revolution. So I was a student, an undergraduate student in the University of Bari, which is in the south of Italy. And I won a scholarship, they're called Erasmus Scholarship, to go and study in Berlin in 2002. And Berlin was it is a major European capital. At the time, it was also very much digitalized. ICTs were all over the place. And I went to Berlin and I had a room in a dorm with a lot of students from East Europe, and they were calling home via computers. They were listening music on MP3s. They were sending emails. None of that, or very little of that was happening in Bari. And then I thought, okay, this is it. This is why computers are going to change our lives. We all knew that they would, right? So we all knew that computers would be a major transformation, but it was hard to see or understand why, because mostly you would use computers to do programming, a little bit of, you might remember Netscape, but it was not that sleek or that user-friendly an experience at the time. When I saw these uses in Berlin, I realized that digital technologies will be penetrating every single aspect of our life and will change it. And so I got back and I said, okay, this is what I want to work on. Will be the major transformation of our times. And, philosophers are always philosophers of their time if they are good. And I don't think I'm an excellent philosopher, but I try to be a good one. So I try to focus on things that are key to my times.
Well, I mentioned at the introduction, your expertise is in philosophy, but you brought that into this space. And I find that intersection super interesting. I actually work in technology, and AI is often the conversation I'm having with business leaders. But it's really around the business landscape, agentic AI or AI agents being deployed in business scenarios. Even though I feel like I'm somewhat informed about the space, I actually look at the conversations I'm having and others, neighbors, friends, colleagues, and I wonder, do I even really know what's happening underneath the surface? So can you touch on a little bit about that? What is happening under the surface that most of us aren't even aware of?
I think if you ask 100 AI experts, they will give you 101 different answers because it really depends on the research you work on. But there are certainly trends. So I think that in terms of research, the agentic moment, which has been hyped before we saw it really flourish, is cooking up quite interestingly results. I'm not sure whether you saw it, but Anthropic released a report about a cyber attack, which was an 80 to 90% fully autonomous run by Claude.
I read the full report.
So
it's frightening.
That's something. It's frightening. And I think this is where the connection between AI and cybersecurity becomes problematic and will be something on which people will have to focus. We wrote a paper which got published in Nature in 2019 showing how attacks on AI will change their nature by not being disruptive anymore, but by becoming manipulative. So you don't attack an AI system not to make it work, but to change its behavior. And that's exactly what happens. Now you manage to have Claude do something that it will never do. And imagine what will happen when that kind of AI get manipulated if it's implemented in a weapon system or in a hospital for diagnostic or that sort of thing. So I think what's happening under the scene or behind the scene is a strong focus of research, this junction between AI and cybersecurity, which is quite interesting. And I think another element which is germane to that is the work that is being done, not to improve necessarily the robustness, but to have a better understanding of the robustness of this technology. So robustness means that AI at the moment is a technology that has a poor shock response. You change a little bit of the input and the machine changes its behavior radically. that means you cannot really trust it a lot, right? Because one bit can create a huge wave at the end of it. And so there is a lot of research, and you cannot really fix it for good. So robustness is not a problem you can solve for good, because there are so many little bits that can change the behavior of the machine that you cannot really foresee them all. But what you want to do is to shrink the possibility, so to reduce the spectrum. And there is a lot of research in this area. So I think that's also very, very, very interesting. So these are the area that I think we will have to consider as, I'm looking at them with a lot of interest. Then there are other few, should we say, not cutting edge. I don't want to say they are cutting edge, but they are more experimental. The implementation of silico plus bio. So when you start implementing chips on bio hardware, whether it's a mouse or a human, despite what some people might say, thinking that we are already there, we're not there. But it is a direction that is being explored. And should we be successful in that direction, that will spark a lot of questions about ethics, about what's right and wrong, and about also what does it mean to be human in that kind of world. But I see that as a long game, so to speak, but it's a game that is being played.
The recent ability of chip manufacturing, technology, large language models, I think the general public's starting to learn more about that. I also want to kind of just ask you about my own life. I go to the bank, I do financial transactions. You mentioned like hospitals, healthcare systems. I log into an app. It's already embedded in our life, is it not? Do we know how much is happening already in this space in kind of everyday life?
So I don't think we are fully aware, not even I think, of how much AI is not only in our life, but on our life. If you allow me the small semantic trick here. So the way AI works is that you need a lot of data and a lot of computational power to extract information which are valuable for you or for any other actors in our societies. In the past 20 years, we've produced a lot of data. The data trail that all of us have produced is immense. This year, we're going to produce, by the end of this year, 200 zettabytes of data. And I always make this joke with my students. It's like 42 trillion of DVDs, one next to another. That's the amount of data we have this year.
It's hard to wrap your head around the exponential volume of data that's being generated,
huge, right?
Cleared every day.
Now, the good thing is that these data are like an ocean. And AI is our fishing cane that helps us extract a fish, the information we want. Now, this is good for science, but it's also good for our lives. And sometimes it's also bad for our lives because some of that information is about us. Why am I taking this long premise? Because it's not just about the ChatGPT that you might be training with your queries and questions. It's not just about the AI on your mobile to the one you talk to. It's about the AI of your bank, which has collected data about you and uses it to know their customers, understanding whether you're going to get the next mortgage or not. It's about the AI for recruiting exercise, which understands whether I'm good enough to be hired for a senior position or not. Is about the price of the next ticket to fly over to the US, Spain, you might buy, and so on and so forth. So it's not just about the AI that is in our life, it's about the AI that is on our life. So the AI that shapes the options and decisions that are made about us by third parties and which still affect us. And that's 360 degrees.
It's, as you even said, you're not sure, even you who studies this and have been researching in this space and writing about it, and one of the thought leaders in the space, you even yourself feel like you might not know how much it's permeated our everyday and living not just with us, but as part of us. There's something that I'm starting to hear emerge. They're calling it an AI bubble. Some people think it's not a bubble. I don't want to get into that. I know you're not going to get into the financial aspects, but I do want to ask you about the hype cycle of AI. And some are referring to almost, there's a half dozen or a dozen big companies that are driving much of this. Certainly there's others and more emerging. But can you talk a little bit about what some to refer to almost as a Ponzi scheme of AI dynamic in terms of investment? Can you just give us your observation of what you see there?
I think that there is a huge hype of AI. It's not necessarily the hype that we experience every day as individuals, but it's more an hype that we see when it comes to major financial transaction, when it comes to major clients. So when you have to sell your AI to a hospital or a bank or a multinational, it happens. And it does not concern necessarily forms of AI that we've known for a few years. Neural networks, we know how they work. We know what the systems can do and cannot do. So that technology is somehow, I wouldn't say mature, but it has been absorbed. It happens secretly or routinely when there is a new type of technology. So now it happens a lot with LLMs. What you hear is every now and then, oh, they can create. Oh, they can think. Or, oh, they can solve these problems. Now it's PhD level students and that sort of things. And then you scratch the surface, but not really that much. It's like just with a little bit of scratching. And it's a super idiotic system that gets tricked with, small prompts, just engineered a bit better. The system really reveals that it's not really smart. It's fragile, as I said before. It doesn't absorb shocks very well. It has hallucinations because doing a lot of statistics with huge volumes of data, of course you're going to make mistakes. So also the eye makes mistake. So the product that has to be sold is, as for any, I think people working in advertising will get this quite clearly. The product that is being sold, AI, is hyped a bit, but it's a hype that doesn't last long, because once you acquired it in your institution, in your organization, you realize quite soon what the boundaries and what the limits are. So I think is the more customers, the more people become aware of what this technology can and cannot do, the more we realize it's not a magic stick, it won't do any super magic trick, the less this hype will take roots. There is also one other element. If you look at the political strategy of every country in the world, I would say at this moment, at least major country, they all mention AI. They all see in AI a factor that will boost productivity, boost economy. The US has declared a lot of investment. UK, France, Italy, Europe. That's true, but it's only true if we, and when I say we, I mean each and any organization, each and any institution, if we understand what is the strategic way in which we're going to use this technology. If you plug AI in your organization without having understood which processes you're going to automate and which processes you're not going to automate, what kind of goals you want to achieve, how do you change the processes so they are better fit for an AI approach. Without a strategy, AI doesn't help us achieving these goals. And I don't see that happening yet. So I'm very worried that we're all pushed into adopting these technologies, but we are not ready for it in terms of strategy. Sometimes in terms of technical readiness, you need to have appropriate data, you need to have appropriate infrastructure. And in terms also thinking about how to embed this technology so that human autonomy is not undermined.
I've mentioned this before on the show, and I think you and I have chatted about it, but I believe there's a spectrum of people who have complete deep knowledge of this industry and this space, and they're actually often the people driving it, all the way down to other end of the spectrum of people who just don't really have this on their radar, or it's really not that important to them, and everything in between. I think I find myself somewhere in between, and it depends on which day and what narrative I'm listening to or looking at. I often find that I'm not sure where I stand on the hype of this. You actually don't come at this just as a technologist, but from that philosopher lens. And you value clarity and truth and how these ideas shape society and people and how we live. I'm curious about, however much you want to share about the confusion of that. Are the leaders in the AI industry, are they patronizing? Are they talking down to us as a general community? How do you see that?
It depends, but yeah, sometimes the narrative about AI doesn't feel genuine. Whenever I read claims about AI becoming intelligent, self-aware, conscious, creative, overtaking humanity, that's low-quality sci-fi, nothing more than that. And when it comes from a developers or provider, I struggle to think that that's a genuine narrative. I always took that as not only is not scientifically grounded, but AI, and I hope we can cover this, but AI poses a lot of severe questions to our societies. And those questions call for governance and regulation. And sometimes it feels that by saying that AI is going to become self-aware, conscious, super intelligent, whatever you want to call it, they try to derail the public debate on the governance of AI. And so it serves the double purpose to hype your product or their product, but also to derail the conversation from something that companies don't really appreciate, which is governance of technologies, regulations, and that sort of things, which I think are quite relevant. So I think this is important. I'm not sure whether they're talking down to us. I think they are trying to distract us, to give a punchline to your reply. I mean, I think they're just trying to show something and hide something else. The technology is there, is improving. There is a lot of potential. There are many things we still have to learn about these technologies. And I think the most important thing that we have to learn is about how to use it for the best. We haven't done that yet because we haven't implemented as much as to have experience. I'll stop, but I want to say this. There was a study report published a few months ago that showed that just a tiny fraction of companies which test AI then use those systems at scale. So a company might have, let's say, 100 tests about different aspects or processes in which they can use AI. And then eventually they might use it just for 10 processes. That gives you a sense of how little we know how to use this technology in the best possible way.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of studies from MIT, McKinsey, and others that have stated that a lot of the AI pilot projects in business are also there's very few of them are succeeding. So I think you're right. There's still an adoption. This shell game that you talk about of their leaders are talking in one area, but they're maybe actually creating something else. I find that interesting. And I also agree with you. I'm absolutely astonished of what AI can bring and the agentic capability, the LLMs that we're seeing, and what the GPU processing is bringing. I just think about healthcare. I think about where we can advance in some of mankind's greatest challenges. So I'm very optimistic in some respects, without a doubt. And I'm a half full kind of guy in that regard for sure. I want to get into some of the areas that are heavier topics and areas that you are one of the world's leading experts in, which is AI and defense and AI and warfare. Probably like many of our listeners, I think about AI in war or AI in defense, probably from Hollywood or from the news briefs where it's a robot on the battlefield or it's a drone, which I know some of that is occurring. And maybe it is cyber warfare or bioterrorism. But I want to ask you, because you have deep knowledge of this, and I'm not sure how much you can share. Maybe there's some other areas that you're not comfortable sharing publicly, but what do I have dangerously wrong? What does the public need to know about what is AI warfare today? What is AI in defense? How does that actually work?
So the public needs to worry about defense, I would say full stop. Let me start from this. So in liberal democracies, we have the Ministry of Defense. We don't have the Ministry of War. And that's an important distinction because a Ministry of Defense is there to defend the democracy, not to wage war. It's crucial that defense is carried out in a way that is coherent with the principles and values of liberal democracies. If that doesn't happen, that's a benchmark for democracy. If a state starts behaving when it's defending itself in a way that is against democratic values and human rights, then you can be sure that that state is not fully democratic, as you might be saying it is. Why I'm saying this? Because AI is in defense 360 degrees. It's changing every single decisional and operational process. From how many bottles do we send to the front line, from intelligence analysis, where is the next threat coming from cyber, we mentioned before the cyber attack, to kinetic, to the operation that with boots on the ground, drones, but also the identification of target. We saw what Israel did in Gaza, no? They used 2 AI systems to identify targets in Gaza. And we might get back to this, but the system had a 10% false positive rate, which means that at the time there were 37,000 people being identified, 3,700 might have been mistakenly identified as legitimate target. So it's 360 degrees. Now, when AI comes in as digital technologies, we mentioned this before as well, it transforms things. So for one example is that AI might take decisions in a way that is not fully transparent to us. And if a decision is not fully transparent, then you cannot challenge it. We've discussed this in the civil society for years now. When you go to a bank and you ask for a mortgage, the bank clerk will likely run an algorithm which is telling whether Rosaria is going to spend too much money on shoes or she will repay her mortgage. I will buy shoes. But I cannot challenge that decision because even if it's biased against women or Italians or you name any categories, I might not be able to know that because the system is not fully transparent. Now imagine that in the context of war, when AI is deciding who is a legitimate target or is helping a high-level officer designing a strategy. How do we keep people accountable for decisions they are not effectively making, but they are just taking from a machine? Then there is another question. Artificial intelligence, as I mentioned before, is not totally robust. So it might change its behavior when it learns something from the environment that might not have been expected at the moment of design and development. So sometimes it's unpredictable. And when it's not predictable, it means you don't control it very much. And in the context of defense, this is very problematic. I'll give you another example from the literature. There was a number of researchers which were testing their AI systems, and they gave it a blueprint of a building, and they asked the AI system to count the number of windows in the most timely, efficient way. The reply of the AI system is a very smart one. It says, well, let's just bomb the building, because if you bomb the building, there will be 0 windows. Smart. Makes no contradiction there, because the system had picked up something from the learning process. Imagine in defense, if a system understands or learns that bombing a school is the best way to achieve a military target. So because we don't control AI very much, it means that we might be using a technology that might perform actions which are in violation of international humanitarian laws and of what is called the just war theory, which is the ethical theory underpinning this body of laws that need to be respected when states wage war. It's important. It's important not only because, at least in Europe, in these current times, we feel the war might not be as far away as it was 10 years ago. And so we might be the subjects of an AI decision in war at some point. But it's also important because for 2 more reasons. The first one is that all these problems that I just mentioned, where they transform war, which is already a horrible thing, into atrocity. They degrade war. They make it even worse. And second, because at the moment, we are using AI in defense quite a bit. There's been a watershed moment, which has been the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has speeded up this process. And we have 0 regulation for it. There is not one bit of regulation in the world about AI in defense. So it's a kind of Wild West situation, which is very problematic because, then I'll stop, as I said before, it's very problematic for liberal democracies. If we start to wage war as a terrorist state would do, then in reality, we are not very different from the terrorist state.
I've been reading about legislation is lagging far behind the pace of AI disruption, just broadly speaking, in business and personal data capture, let alone the landscape that you have spoken about and written about in research around AI in defense. But thinking about legislation lagging far behind the pace of disruption, with that in mind, Rosaria, it sounds like democracies are currently, or countries are relying on AI systems without transparency or without accountability. Is that what's occurring? And if so, what could crack first? What could be a major consequence of that?
Yeah, I think this accountability, moral responsibility, transparency, these are key elements which are under a lot of pressure. So in Europe, we started protecting privacy with the GDPR right after Cambridge Analytica. So we learned first the hard way that privacy was under pressure, and then we start protecting it. And unfortunately, this is the way things go in several occasions when it comes to technology and governance. It might be that there is a massive crisis and we realize that we need regulation. It's harder to have regulations of AI in defense because Politically speaking, it makes little sense. The first objection I receive when I talk about ethics and regulation of AI in defense is why we should regulate AI in defense and so put boundaries to the use of these technologies when our opponents don't do it and so lose a little bit of the advantage that we might get. So if everybody thinks like that, of course, there is no regulation, right? So it's the political will is not there. And you can tell the political will is not there when you think about autonomous weapon systems, for example. There is a group at the UN which has been working on autonomous weapon systems since 2013, right after the first US directive on autonomy in defense. Since then, they have not even found an agreement on the definition of autonomous weapon system. There is no political will. It's not that it takes like a genius to define an autonomous weapon system. This is why I say the public opinion needs to be more present, needs to want to have this debate. It's the only way we can, try to shape this discourse. In understanding that as liberal democracies, we bound our abilities and we bound the power of the state in several occasions, and we should do it also in defense. The fact that we could use fully autonomous weapon systems doesn't mean that we should, not even to win a war, because those systems pose severe threats to fundamental values in which we believe. And if we believe in those values, we cannot think that those values stop with the borders of our countries. No, those values are about human dignity, are about the respect of people, are about the autonomy of people. And the autonomy of an Italian citizen is no less or no more than a French, a UK, and American citizens, and so on. And so the same for dignity and so forth. But I think that moral pressure can only come from the public opinion. I don't think it will spur from a merely political or strategic debate.
You mentioned GDPR. This is a space that's near and dear to me. I actually remember, I think it was May 25th, 2018. I was implementing a lot of campaign development, and I had to implement GDPR for many of our customers at the time. I happen to live in California. There's a California Consumer Protection Act. I'm very familiar with it. These are regulations around data privacy. Without a doubt, super important, for sure. But the areas that you're speaking about are existential. I mean, we're talking about life and death at grand scale. Who decides? How do we come together on what I would say legislation that is going to help us?
It starts with the public debate. It starts with the commitment to these debates. Imagine a parallel with climate change. 20 years ago, climate change was not a thing. Companies selling water, companies selling whatever thing that was packaged in plastic wouldn't really care. Now you cannot buy a bottle of water without reading recycled to be recycled. It has become a thing, not just because, or even not because scientists were, ringing the bell and saying, oh, look, the time is clicking, the clock is getting closer to the end, we have to do something. It has become a thing because the public opinion has shifted somehow.
This is like cigarette health years ago, or seatbelts in automobiles, or nuclear warheads and fission. Is that how you see this? There's got to be public awareness?
It has to be public awareness, and it has to be a public debate about where do we stand as society. And from there, some results will be seen. Without public pressure, it won't happen. There is no incentive within politics to make it happen endogenously, I would say. It requires some exogenous push.
I have to ask then, if you said, John, do you know when AI is making life and death decisions that might directly impact me? I don't think I would know. Does the general public know when AI is making life and death decisions that may impact them?
That's not the point. What the public should know is getting informed, trying to get relevant and correct information. But it's about understanding what processes the defense institutions are going through, from where they are sourcing their AI, for what uses are they putting there, what kind of rules and standards they are applying for. Is there a remediation process? Is there an audit process? So you can ask the meta question. Of course, it's defense. Of course, some bits need to be secreted, and they will. It is correct that they are secreted because it's defense. None of us here is naive to think that it has to become, fully transparent. But that's the beauty of democracy, that you can still have accountability, you can still have auditing, you can still have oversight, because powers are divided. So, for example, public opinion might request that there is a committee auditing every single procurement process of the Ministry of Defense in whatever country to make sure that sovereign resources are used and preferred to the third parties, that certain companies are not involved. We might demand that there is an ethics committee independently validating the choices of the Ministry of Defense. You can have ways in which control can be articulated. It's not about, I'm not talking about direct democracy. We all have full lives and busy lives, so we don't need another job. It's like becoming a defense auditor, but and that won't be correct. But we might be pushing for institutions to institutions to be proactively checking what defense forces are doing and making sure that they align with the values of our society.
You're just encouraging me and the listeners, those watching, you're just encouraging them to lean in, listen more, learn. And
do this more, learn more, ask questions when you happen to attend whatever, if you do, but like you meet the local politicians, you talk to the local representative, pose the question. The way you will pose a question, knowing that your bank will make a decision on a mortgage and change your life, no? We've discussed about bias because of this, because we talked about bias for decades already, because everybody felt it was something that could touch you. All of us might be categorized in the wrong way so that we are discriminated somehow. It's the same thing with defense. It's not a remote thing. Defense in our societies, because we've been lucky enough not to see war for decades, it is felt as a remote thing, as something that either we have to have, or when we practice defense miles and miles away from where we are. It's not the right approach.
I often feel like I'm being negative about AI. I just want to reiterate, I'm extremely optimistic about the opportunity and the potential. I find this as an incredible inflection point in society and humanity. And we literally could potentially solve some of mankind's greatest challenges. So I'm super excited about the opportunity and hopeful about it. I want to touch on something just that I've talked about a lot on this show and with colleagues, and I've written about, and that's just the pace of change. I've seen disruption in the past, in historical times, but even in my own life. But we've had time to adapt to those changes. It just seems like the systems are changing so fast that it seems like we're redesigning society around AI instead of the other way around. From where you sit, how do you see that dynamic playing out?
Yeah. If I can just go back to the point you were making about the opportunities of AI, and then I'll answer your question. I think you're totally right. It's one of the most powerful tools humanity has ever had to understand and act on the world. But also that good potential, it won't realize without people being more aware of it. Imagine this trajectory. We started talking about, you remember perhaps at some point AlphaGo from Google unlocking the mechanism of protein folding. That's a major scientific breakthrough, because once you understand that, you can cure a lot of diseases. And we can use AI for climate change, and then we can use AI for peace, and we can use AI for justice. And all of a sudden, this whole massive potential gets forgotten over an arch which ends with erotic chat with ChatGPT. What does go wrong from let's solve humanity problems to we now offer erotic chat for you if you are of age? Not that I have anything against the latter, but it seemed like an overshooting. You don't need that kind of technology, that kind of power, that kind of environmental input to have a hard chat that you can.
Well, and that's where we saw the internet, right? I mean, isn't that how the internet really took off?
And I think that potential, so that this shows us that potential, using AI for the good of humanity and the good of the environment, doesn't happen if people are not on it. If this is not part of the debate, if we are passive consumer, if we're just happy of post the kitten on the social network, use ChatGPT to do the next Beatles-like song or whatever chat they're going to allow us to do a little while, that's okay. But remember that there is a bigger game. Remember, ask for something more, push for something more. It's not anymore just a technology. It's part of our societies. It's part of our political life. And we have to engage in it, trying to steer it and not to be steered by it. And this is what you're saying. So, designing society around AI, it's what likely happens if we keep following and we never take the steering wheel. The area where I work in, digital ethics, used to be called cybernetics. And it was a math professor in the US, Robert Wiener, who established it in the 50s. Cybernetics come from the Greek word Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is the person who steers the boat. We all need to become both steers here. We all need to ask what we want this technology for and ask for that. We can use it. It's all the funny things that we do. That's all right. I mean, there is no problem with it as long as nobody gets hurt and it's done with consent from everybody. But the big things won't happen if people don't acquire some level of civic awareness about how this technology changes us, and so making sure that it will change us in the way in which we want to be changed, if that makes any sense.
It 100% does. It gets very personal, right? I mean, if there's a big topic of if AI is going to do all of our jobs, what becomes of us? This kind of broader concept. One, I guess, the question, do you have a point of view on that? I'm curious about the word purpose. What is our purpose if AI is going to basically do a lot of the manual kind of work we do now? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's what does it mean to be human in an age of where AI does a lot of things for us. I don't think AI is going to make us all unemployed. I think it's going to change work. We'll see, hopefully, a world where some tasks of our work routine will be delegated. Some other tasks cannot be delegated. The example of the Anthropic attack is a good one because the attackers use it very smartly. They did the strategy. And then the AI system do all the boring bits. Terrible, but great. That's a lesson.
Remarkable.
That's
a canary in the coal mine. Yeah.
So imagine having a daily work or a daily routine where you can delegate the boring emails, the boring accountancy, the boring elements, and then you can spend time thinking or getting more educated. The point is making sure that AI does not become a tool of alienation, but a tool of growth, of flourishing. And again, that doesn't happen if we are not proactive on it. For example, this is a thing I was mentioning before and I'm very keen about. If we are adopting AI in our organization, we will need policies to make sure that human autonomy is not overwritten by artificial autonomy. And that's no sci-fi. Because imagine you are a doctor and you're using AI for diagnosis. And then the AI is telling something that you don't think is 100% correctly. And you don't want to go with what the AI system is telling you. But if the hospital has not provided a policy so that you are not liable more than usual for disagreeing with AI systems, you won't do it because 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 is not convenient for you. And that's where artificial autonomy overrides human autonomy, which means intuitions, which means gut feelings, which means expertise. In that way, it becomes an alienation because you as a doctor go in and you just start doing a box ticking exercise and not your job anymore. So again, it's about how we humans use this technology and decide what to do with this technology.
We've seen this before. We've seen it with, certainly in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we've seen it with the internet. We've seen it with mobile, smartphones, social media. I think we have some big decisions to make around this. I love your point of view on we, individually and as a society, need to be very aware and informed. I think there's such a concentration of power in the AI space and the pace of changes I talked about moving so fast. You have Meta, Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, there's XAI, Grok. There's a handful of heavyweights that are driving so much of this. And you mentioned the sea of data, the exponential volume of data that we're producing and that's being captured. But as we move into this AI space, I often think about how is data being used at an AI scale and who's really being left behind when we think about capturing data for AI? How do you see that?
Well, it's very problematic because there are regions in the world where digitalization has not been as fast and as radical as in other parts of the world. So, for example, countries which are the global south is much less represented than the global north when it comes to the data collection carried out in the past decade. And so there is a divide there in terms of, I won't say it in the perfect way, but enjoying the uses of AI. There was a study done in the US a few years ago, and I don't remember which university, but they showed that applying AI into a maternity ward in a hospital would systemically harm Hispanic and Afro-American women. Not because AI is racist, but because it's trained on the health data of Caucasian women. And the physiology of the Caucasian women is not the same as of the Hispanic and Afro-American women. And that would actually harm the last two categories of women. So imagine about developing cures, healthcare that might be used worldwide, but they rely on underrepresented groups of people. So this will be one way in which the uneven data collection of the past decades, because we're really talking about the past decades. We're not talking about the last 6 months of data collection.
Right.
My impact might have a huge impact in the world. We think about that digitalization has occurred in the same way around the globe. It is not. It does not. In many countries, it's a different story. And now in other countries, there is a lot of data harvesting which happens without much care for the rights of the citizens of those countries, because there is a kind of a trade-off between accessing the data and getting some help in terms of access to technology. So that's another very interesting and problematic question to address, I guess.
Rosaria, I want to kind of ask you some questions about, I'll call them tactical takeaways for those who might not live and breathe in the parties of the UN or government entities. They live in the business world. They live in their day-to-day. They might be mid-career, mid-tier managers. They might be C-level executives. But can I ask you a couple questions in that area?
Sure.
There's something I'm sensing that companies are moving fast because they don't want to be left behind. And I want to ask you directly, what should leaders be thinking about? Where are they moving too fast, and what should they be rethinking first?
So tech company leaders should think more about the robustness of the product that they sell, that they produce, because that has an impact, and it will bite back at some point, I think. And I also think that they should be very careful these days in terms of considering the dual use aspect of the technologies. Sooner or later, everything becomes more palatable, defense palatable. And that has implications internally within organizations, because sometimes, as we saw in the past, employees are not happy to produce stuff for defense. And externally, you have more clients perhaps, or more customers, but you have less control of your technology. So that's one other element I would consider.
Is there any area of our lives or industries that will not be changed by this?
I cannot say no, because I don't have, as a researcher, I need to have some data somehow. So I wouldn't be able to say no, like dogmatically. But if I think about it, we have AI, which supports people who are mourning a loss. We have AI for creativity. We have AI for work, AI for mobility. It's hard to imagine a space which will be AI-free, unless we want to make it AI-free.
I don't see an area that isn't going to have some form of change. I think about Blockbuster Video or Kodak cameras or the flip phone. Back in the day, there were so many things that we never thought would be changed, and they don't exist anymore. And I think about industries that I work with. I think about how we live our lives 50 years ago and saying 50 years from now. I don't see anything that's not going to be changed in some way, and some dramatically disrupted. From a philosophical background and the expertise you have, is there a dangerous assumption that we are all making about AI right now that you should tell us about?
I think two. One, we already discussed this idea that the technology is a perfect technology. It's not. So it makes mistake. It's not good at everything. So it's not a magic stick. The second is that sometimes the description that you just made, and I often make as well, in terms of how these things are changing, the one might be overwhelmed with it. The one might feel like, okay, things are gonna change, and I'm gonna be passively taking all this change. It will change. It will change quickly. Not in terms of months, we have years. And be mindful that change requires also some proactive approach from all of us, so we can steer it. Because it's a change which is driven by a commercial push. And we should not forget about this.
It's already changing, disrupting industries.
It's disrupting a lot, but it disrupts things as long as we use it. It's a different thing from the past. It's a massive commercial uptake of this technology that will make it really make it changing things. So eventually, each of us as customers has a little power to steer a little bit the change, I think.
We just finished a series with AI filmmakers, and I was actually quite inspired because many of them spoke about they're traditional creatives. They've been working in edit bays with cameramen and storytelling, and now they're using AI to tell their stories. But they were it was very inspiring because the AI filmmakers talked about the human element of storytelling still being at the core of their craft.
Indeed. I would be surprised if he wasn't. But that's the point. I mean, when we talk about using AI for creative purposes, now whether it's writing an essay or writing a movie, writing a book, producing art of any other sort, it can be used. It's a new tool, and I think it would be hard and mistaken to demonize it. But the point with art is that there is a communication of a meaning. A book touches us because someone else was able to say in ways in which we were able to say something we felt. A paint moves us because we feel an emotion, and so on with music and anything. If there is no meaning that is transmitted through a piece of art, it's not a piece of art. That's why a chair doesn't move you, but a sculpture might. AI doesn't convey any meaning. It might be useful in sharpening the meaning or the message human have, but it doesn't have its own messages. And so I am confident that there will always be a human, not just a human in the loop, a human seed that will sparkle the message. And then you can use AI to, write it better, produce it better. That's fine. I'm not against it. But it's all about the human.
Yeah, I mean, humans emote. We have feelings. It's visceral. It's very innate of our part of our DNA.
AI doesn't need any art. If there was a world with only AI agents, there would be no art.
I mean, I followed Rafik Anadol, who's really codified and brought multiple data sets from art into his world. I find his work fascinating. Going back to disruption, it's not just a job that's going to be changed. It's not just the skills that need to be rethought. It's not just a company. It's going to be entire sectors. And they are changing now, as we talked about, healthcare, financial services, in AI and defense. Is there a sector or an industry that's going to dramatically be changed and disrupted that we just aren't prepared for?
I can give one of those pretending sharp answers. Whenever you can have data that allow you to make forecasting to reduce risks, that's where AI would be a lead thing. Whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, whether it's security, whenever you can reduce the risks, then you will become more reliant on AI because it will change effectively that sector by reducing the risks, so allow people to have more aggressive strategies in their professional activities.
I think it's Sam Altman who speaks about 100 years from now, we're going to look back at the era that we come from, that it's barbaric, that healthcare will be much better, that we will have solved a lot of the challenges, much like we look at historical times as being barbaric. Looking back, he has some similar beliefs. I want to ask you, and I know this isn't your world specifically, just the word democracy. There is an AI warfare conversation, this AI race, if you will. There's an AI race going on that if we don't do it, if our companies in the US or in Europe don't manage to lead and succeed, I mean, there's a winner take all mindset. If the democratic society doesn't take the lead, others will, China or others. One, I guess, how do you feel about that? What's your take on that? How do you see that? And then the second question is, this is a future prediction maybe that I'll try to ask you, is what does AI mean for democracy in say 2030?
The AI race is part of the narrative, the idea that if you champion AI, then you champion the world because you're going to be more effective, more productive. I am quite skeptical about it. Let me give you an example. You know who was the first person to deposit the patent for a car? It was a guy called Benz in Germany at the end of the 1900s. You know which is the most common car maker in the world these days? Toyota. Doesn't matter who arrives first. It really doesn't matter. It only matters if you're producing it, perhaps. It matters who provides the best, most robust, the best trade-off in terms of cost, performance. The adoption is not driven by the cutting edge. So it really doesn't matter if the first AI, the first cloud service, the first thing is done in the US, and then it can never be done somewhere else. That's not true. Other countries, other places can learn and develop robust technologies a bit later than the other. But that doesn't mean that that technology will not be adopted, especially because if it's local, there is more control on it. There is a kind of backpedal advantage here that should be considered. So I think that's another narrative in which I don't buy that much.
The AI race narrative, you don't subscribe to it as I do, and others have kind of talked about it. You see it a little bit.
I see. I think it is a narrative that's taken roots, so we have to be aware of it. But I'm not confident that's the right way, because it kind of excludes a lot of possibilities that you could do. I mean, why do you have to be the first? You don't have to be the first. You have to be able to produce solid technology that people in your country can buy and use reliably. And if somebody does it first, you can only learn from that.
I mean, AlphaGo became AlphaFold. Now there's healthcare potential that we never could have imagined just.
So the race is great. It's great to spur research. It's great to spur progress and to spur innovation. But thinking of losing the race as in we lose the adoption of AI, that's not true. You lose the race, it means you don't lead the research, but you can still develop your own technology and get an AI-driven process or society. I think it's important we keep that in mind, because not so much perhaps in the US, but in Europe, there is this feeling that it can only be US technology that we use because they are the one who are leading the AI race. And I always say, well, it's not true. I mean, they are leading the AI race, indeed, but we could also learn from what they do and accept that we're going to get second, but produce equally reliable technology. It's important to keep that option in mind, I think. In terms of what does AI means for democracy in 2030, I think AI, we'll have to see the next round of national elections, 2028, I think, or 29. The combination of AI and social media is a very problematic combination for democracy, I think. The value of democracy before digital transformation was in the fact that people with different views were comfortable with each other. And this was because we were constantly exposed to each other's view. And we were able to be comfortable in an uncomfortable conversation, so to speak, in an uncomfortable space, right? AI and social media, they create comfortable space or spaces, a so-called filter bubble, no? Places where you're happy to spend an extra 15 minutes a night, even if you're tired, because you see things that support your views, that kind of give you a pat on the shoulder, says, you're right in thinking that, whatever you're thinking. Losing the ability of having a debate with people or ideas, or engaging with ideas that are not close to your own ideas, is problematic, because that undermines the democratic debate, which is the public debate, which then leads to fair elections and then democratic government. It leads to a polarization. Whenever you have polarization, democracy suffers a little bit, increasingly more, I would say, because when you polarize, you don't discuss anymore.
You have the ability to influence government, big decisions across the globe, different
I wish, John.
But you don't have the ability to impose. If you had the ability to impose a global rule for AI right now, a structural rule, what would you choose? What would you select?
Two rules. One, it would be about boundaries, the hard limit being the protection of human dignity. So there will be some cases where we don't use AI. So the boundaries are important. And then I think I will try to come up with a smart criterion for trade-off. Ethical uses of AI are not ethical because they are entirely good. And bad uses are not bad because they are entirely bad. It's always a balance. You have to give in something to get something else. I'll just give you an example. Privacy. During the pandemic, we all gave away a little bit more privacy in the name of public health. So you always have to have that kind of trade-off. Finding the golden rule of the trade-off with AI, that would be a major achievement, I would say. Yeah. But it will take more than just one mind. We will need a bit more philosophers in the room.
Well, I think I owe it to you and the general public that we lean in more. We become more informed. We lean into political discourse and conversation. And with that, I would ask you that you continue to inform those leaders that you have the ability to communicate with. So I value that tremendously. I know that you speak about ethics in different ways, but I want to ask you from the general population standpoint, from my perspective, is there an ethical question that we're avoiding today that we should be asking and that might haunt us years from now?
I think there is a question about the question of our self-determination, which goes hand in hand again with our autonomy, and dignity. A person becomes full when they are able to make their own choices without being influenced by third parties in a great way. It's what Kant told us, the ability to get out of we call it the status of minority, when you get out of the influence of the world and you manage to make your choices, determine yourself by yourself. That's an ethical question, whether we're really doing that every and each day of our lives, and we're doing that for good. I fail, so I pose the question to see whether to share the failures. But it's important in terms of AI as well, no? Because AI helps us making decisions every day, 360 degrees, from the book you buy, the movie you see, the trip you take. How much does that take away of your ability to make choices and to make your own choices? And that's a question.
I can't thank you enough. We covered a lot of ground. I sense that you have a lot more to share. What are you working on now? Where can people find more about you, your work at Oxford and others?
So, John, the researcher who tells you what they're working on right now, it's a fool. This is a secret that is guarded more than national defense secret, only once it's published. I'm still working on AI in defense. I'm working on understanding how to translate big principles into practices. How do we get from AI has to be fair to fair uses of AI, so to speak? What is the process there, whether that can be done? I'm also interested in other technologies, whether it's quantum, whether it's this bio plus silico thing. So new forms in which digital technologies can change our lives. So this is the work that I'm focusing on these days. And I'm increasingly more interested about, you opened this conversation talking about power. And so I'm increasingly more interested about how liberal democracies can defend their power without betraying their values in a world where AI race, digital race, become the prevalent narratives these days.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you
for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Very interesting questions. Thank you.
You've been listening to Disruptor Confessions. And if you enjoy this conversation, please follow us and subscribe. Thank you.